So I'm going to show you how to make a custom fitted waistband to go on the top of your pants. I have made up a pair of pants here. You can kind of see the top of them. So rather than just taking this waist and sewing some elastic in the top and turning it over, I've decided I want a little bit more fitted waist, and I want something a little bit more modern than just the gathering. So I've cut my pants down. I tried them on and I determined that I wanted them to sit 3 inches, about 3.5 inches below my actual waist. But I want, when I put my pants on, I actually want the waist of the pants to come, like the pant waist to sit on my waist. So I've cut these down. So I've taken a little bit off the top. So now I'm using pink here just because it's something that you can see a little bit more for the actual pants. I'm going to be putting a blue, and I'm using a ribbing. I'll show you here. So this is a ribbing that I've got. So I've actually got these pieces cut, and I'll show you these pieces in just a few minutes. But to start with, I take a piece of either the lycra or cotton lycra, a piece of ribbing. I could have even used the velour that these pants are made out of, but I didn't want anything that bulky. So I've taken and I've cut my strip 4 inches wide. So you can see here that it's 4 inches wide. I've measured along the top of these pants, and you want your strip to be either the same width as your pants, or if your pants are a little loose or very, very stretchy, then you may want to cut your waistband. You may want it to be a little bit snugger. So for this, my waistband is actually going to be just about the same size as the pants. So what I've done is I've got my 2 strips that measure the same as my top of my waist of my pants here, if I lay them out. Now I'm going to serge this, but if you're not going to serge this, you want this strip to be 2 inches longer. And the reason is that you're going to be cutting this into 2 pieces. So you're going to have a back and a front, each of these strips. And each strip is also going to have a side seam, which is going to be probably 1/2 inch at the most, so between 1/4 and 1/2. So that's why you want to cut an extra 2 inches long, because if you think about it, you've got 2 1/2-inch seams on each side, which means 1 inch on each side taken up, which is 2 inches in total. So I've got my strip, and I'm going to take one strip first. So the 2 strips, one is going to be a facing and one is going to be the outside piece. So I'm going to take my strip here, and I am going to kind of go over my seam allowance. So I've got 1/2 inch. I'm going to line it up at my center front, or actually my side seam, not my center front. So I'm lining it up on the front piece at the side, and I'm going to bring it over to the other side. So I've now kind of lined it up. You can go to your actual paper pattern. You don't have to go to your pants. Your paper pattern might be a little more accurate as far as how snug it is going to be. So I'm going to take this measurement here, and I've got my 1/2 inch marks. So now I'm going to lay this out. If you've got a pen or a piece of chalk, you might want to just take and measure that or mark it. So I'm taking this here. So I've got 1/2 inch seam allowance in each side. I have a rotary cutter, so I'm just going to cut my piece in half. So now I have a front. Now you may want to mark on this if you've got some chalk or something. I'm just looking for a piece of chalk here. So you may want to make so you don't get all your pieces mixed up. you know, put an F on here and an O. So that means that this is the outside. Now, when I sew this, I'm going to treat this where I've marked with the chalk as the wrong side of the fabric. But I know now that I've got a front outside piece. Now, my other piece is going to be the back. So you want to take and you want to just double check that it's going to be okay for the back. Let me just get to the back of my pants. So I'm lining this up here. Got my seam allowances, and that's going to match just fine. So again, I'm going to put a B and an O, so I know that that's the outside of these pants. Okay, so they may not be the same width. If you look at this, actually my back is a little bit wider. Quite often that's not the case. The front can be wider, or the front is generally wider, because if you think your side seams, your measurement has to go right across your tummy. So, and then your back, if you've got a sway back, or your back is generally a little bit smaller. This could just be the way the pants are. Anyway, I'm going by what works with my pattern. So now I'm going to take these two pieces and I'm going to put them with the right sides together. So I'm laying them so I can see my chalk writing. So I've got these here. Now I'm going to I've got this other strip, and it's going to be my facing piece. Now the first thing I want to do with this facing piece, and it's the same length as my other pieces. So the first thing I want to do is I want this to be a little bit narrower. Now you could do this step when you're cutting your strips out, but because I cut my two strips at the same time, I'm going to do it now. So the facing piece has to be a 1/4 of an inch narrower than the outside piece. So instead of it being 4 inches, it is going to be 3 3/4. So I'm just taking my ruler here, and I'm just going to trim off a 1/4 of an inch off of this. So this is going to be, I'm going to put a B and an I, so I know it's the inside. Okay, so first I want to take my piece, just like I did my outside piece, and I want to mark it, and I want to cut it to the correct length, because it's important that these two, the inside and the outside, is the same length. It's going to be a little bit shallower on the inside, but you still want it to be the same length. So I'm going to take now I'm just going to double check here, make sure that this is, so yeah, so that's okay. So I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to lay with the right sides together, lay the pieces on top of each other, lining up the side seam. So here is my side seam. I'll pull this out of the way first. So here is my side seam here. So before I stitch this side seam, what I want to do is I actually want to give myself some waist shaping. So the bottom edge of this is going to fit into the pants. And if you remember, we cut a little bit off the top. So this edge here actually isn't my waist. It's more, it could be your high hip. It could be just a bit above your high hip. It could even be a little bit lower if you wanted a really deep waistband. So that's why this measurement here is actually larger than my actual waist measurement. So I don't want these to be loose at the waist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to measure my waist, determine what I want the upper edge to be for my waist. And I do know that this has to be a 1/2 inch on each side smaller than the bottom. So I've taken and marked it with a piece of chalk. I'm actually going to get, here's my little bit clearer chalk marker. So I'm going to move this back. There, now I got a little bit more room. So what I'm going to do is, this is my edge that's getting sewn down to the side of my pants. So I'm just marking down here. There's my 1/2 inch mark. I know I have to take off a 1/2 inch at the top here. So I'm going to take from the very edge, so not the seam allowance, but from the very edge, I'm just going to mark a line. So you can see here I've got a line, hopefully that shows up, that's on an angle. So I'm going to take and I'm going to cut this on this side. Now you can either take one of these pieces, make sure that you line up your side seams on the other side, because if your back is a little bigger than your front, or your front is a little bigger, it's not generally going to just lay flat. So you can take and just lay it over top, use it as a template, and then just take and trim this off. So I've got all 4 pieces. So now I have the outside edge of my pant waistband all ready to sew. And because I don't want it to fall apart, I'm just going to put a pin like so. Now if you're using a serger, which I will be using, then you want to, if you put your pins in horizontally here, you don't have to pull them all out as you serge. You can just kind of serge right upside, and this will clear your presser foot. So there's my outside of my pant. Now because this is the facing piece, and because it's a little bit shorter, you're going to want to start again and take this on an angle, draw yourself a line. Actually, you probably just needed to cut it. So I've cut that little wedge off of the side of this side. I'm going to line these up together. I'm going to do the same thing on here, lining my ruler right up with the edge of my fabric, and then in a 1/2 inch at the top. So I've trimmed that. So now I have my facing pieces all ready to go. So these are my pieces that are ready for me to sew. Take to the serger or the sewing machine, whichever you choose to do. Okay, now I'm going to flip back over to my pieces here that I've cut out of the blue to match my pants. And I didn't mark these, so of course I have to sort of lay them out so I can see that this is a facing piece. And I'll just double check that's a facing piece. So these are going to be the outside pieces. So I've cut these on an angle. I've got my front and back pieces. This is a piece of ribbing, so there really isn't a right or a wrong side to it. So I am going to take these to the serger, and I'm going to serge these up so that I can show you the next step. Okay, so here we are at the serger, and like I said, I've got my blue ribbing pieces cut. I've got them with the right sides together, and I'm just putting it into the serger here. My serger is set at about a 3. I've got 2 needles, and I'm just going to sew that short edge. So I've sewn one side. I'm just going to flip it over, and I'm going to serge the other side here. So you can see. Make sure you catch your whole seam. So I'm just clipping my threads as I go, most of them. Missed one. Okay, so here I have my outside of my piece cut. So I'm going to do the same now to the facing part, which is 1/4 of an inch narrower. I've got this here. Now, I'm not sure if you can notice that I am sewing this all from the top down to the bottom of the waistband. I generally like to keep everything in the same direction. When you're sewing your pants together, when you're sewing your out seams and your inseams of your actual pants, you want to start at the hem. And you want to start at the hem and serge all the way up. That way your pants will remain nice and straight on the grain, as long as you've cut them on the grain. If you sew one seam one way and then sew the out seam down, and you happen to have a discrepancy as far as the hem goes, and you have to cut a little bit off of the front on one and cut a little bit off on the back on the other side, what happens is your pants actually will start to twist. Okay, so you can see I've got my band here. So this is the facing piece, and this is the wider piece. So I've turned the facing right side out, and I'm leaving the wider piece so that it's wrong side out. So now this is where I want to put something that's going to stabilize my waistband in. So this is where, if you're going to put any elastic in, you want to put a piece of elastic into the top of this waistband. And it's important when you're doing this that your outer edge of your waistband is facing up, whether it's on your sewing machine or if it's on your serger. So this is going to be on my serger, and I'm actually going to serge. I'm just going to put some rubber elastic in here. Now I've got this top of this band cut to fit my waist, so I'm not pulling this elastic. All I am doing is just serging the two edges together. So I'm lining up the facing at the top edge and the outer waistband at the top edge. I'm taking my elastic and I'm just laying it right along the edge, and I'm going to start, and I'm going to serge this in. Just going to get it, wiggle it in there. Sometimes it's a little bit crazy. Now for serging, when I'm serging elastic in, I put my serger stitch length at the longest length that it has. It just makes sewing elastic in so much easier. Now you may want to pin this. You aren't going to pin through the elastic, but you may want to put a few pins in your facings, and make sure that you have your front facing and your front outer piece lined up. You haven't got it twisted around and got the back and the front mixed up. Okay, so I'm just going to take this, and like I say, I'm just gently laying this over top. I'm not stretching it. I just want it to basically sew right over the edge. I'm not cutting anything off here when I'm serging. If you were doing this at your sewing machine, you would be doing this at 1/4 of an inch. Now the width of the elastic is purely personal. I like a narrow piece up here. You're not going to see this elastic. It's going to be hidden inside your facing. So you're not going to see it. It's just a stabilizer. It's just to keep your pants from sliding down over your waist. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going around here. Like I say, I'm not pulling anything. I've lined up my my side seams. So I'm lining up my side seams. And if you're serging or sewing, a good rule of thumb with that is to push one of your side seams, like maybe the facing side seam, so that it's going towards you, and the upper side seam so that it's coming away from you. What that does is, when I'm sewing along here, it kind of if the top layer is kind of pushing up towards the back, like the facing layer, it will get hung up on that side seam, and it actually helps to line them up so that they match they'll match perfectly. So like I say, I'm just sewing along here. If you're afraid, if you're serging and you think you're going to be cutting off, you're just, you know, still getting comfortable with holding your fabric, you may want to raise the blade so that the blade is disengaged and not cutting anything off. You don't want to cut into your elastic. The rubber elastic, it doesn't change the integrity of it if it happens to cut it a little bit. But if this was a knitted elastic or a braided elastic, it would definitely change the strength of it. So I'm just about at the side seam again, and like I've started, I've got my seam allowance going forward for the upper, and I'm feeling back there, it's going towards the back. So I'm just going to go over these, and you don't want to go more than about an inch. You don't want a lot of bulk. And where you have that join in the elastic, like I could have started center back, but I like to start at the side, so I actually don't have a lot of bulk over the seam. The double is right towards the front. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip this waistband so that it's all right side out. So now I've got it flipped right side out. And you can line up your bottom edge, keeping in mind where you've got your seam allowances. So one is going to go to the front, one is going to go to the back. So if I go all the way around, what you will find is when you line up the bottom edge, there's the top edge. You can't see the back. If I turn it over, you can see that there's just that little bit of a ridge here, which is the extra 1/4 of an inch that the facing or the front of the waistband is, but they line up at the bottom. So it just keeps everything towards the back. So this is the outside edge that is going to be showing on my pants. Now this is probably a little bit less than 3 inches. I was, with this fabric, this was all I had, so I was just trying to get something that was going to work and match my velour pants. Okay, so now I'm going to take this and I'm going to pin my pants onto it, and I'm going to press it and serge around. Now one step that you can do if you're, I would suggest to do this for the first couple, is you can line up this edge, go to your zigzag machine and just zigzag these edges so that they match and that they're closed. That way, if you do happen to go to the serger with this, you're not going to have one maybe caught up a little, and you won't catch both layers when you sew it to the sewing machine or to the pair of pants. Okay, so I've actually taken and zigzagged this edge so that you can see this is nice and closed. And I've got my pants. So I've got the right side of my pants lined up to the right side, which is the side that does not show the little seam of my waistband. And I'm just going to put a pin here. This is, I believe, let me just check so this is the center front. So I've just put a pin in there. I'm going to put a pin over lining up my waistband at the side seam. So there again, serging purposes, I like my pins just to go parallel to my seam. And I did mark the center back here. So I'm just going to line that up with the center back seam. And I've run out of pins at this particular area. Oh no, I found one. Okay, so I'm going to put my next side seam pin in. So I've got the 2 pieces pinned together. I like to work with the waistband on the top and the pants on the bottom, because generally if there's going to be anything that's got to be stretched to fit a little, which sometimes you will want your waistband to be, like I say, if this was a really stretchy fabric, I don't want to necessarily have my waistband the exact same size as it. I want it to be a little bit smaller so that it's going to sort of hug my stomach and my waist without being too tight. So I'll start, you can start either at the center back, which is this seam here. So I'm going to start at the center back. I've lined up these edges. So I've got these edges lined up, making sure that my serger needles are upright so I can slide my fabric. I was able to kind of get everything right into the serger there. So I'm now going to take and serge this together. This is the inside facing of my waistband here. Serging this. I'm just going to come around until I get to the side seam. Now the side seam has a little bit of a like a point to it, so you may have to just take it and kind of fit it in, give the waist a little bit of a stretch till it gets through the point. If your needles are down, then you can kind of move your fabric around. If I need to lift anything, I just take the toe of my presser foot and just kind of lift it up a little. It will release any fabric that happens to be stuck right there. So I'm just going around, making sure that I can see that I'm catching the pants. And because I've got the waistband edges zigzag together, I know I'm catching both of those. I'm just coming to the center front. Take the pin out. You don't have to take the pins out as you go, especially if you're pinning them sideways. So I'm going all the way around. And just going to take this pin out. Velour tends to curl towards the wrong side, so I'm just taking my time and making sure that I'm uncurling that seam or that edge so that it doesn't sew all curled back. So I'm almost back to my center back. So I'm just gonna, because I'm on the serger, I've just taken and just gone over it. Okay, so now I'm just going to flip these out here. So there's my waistband, nice and flat, sewn into my velour pants. So it's not bulky. There's elastic up here, so this will sit nice and snugly on my waist, and yet it fits nice and smooth across my stomach there. Now this is definitely this is only about a 2.5 inch wide waistband, so maybe you may want to have something a little wider. You may want to have something a little dip, but you can see, you know, you can use your creativity here. You could actually put a piece of piping in this seam here before you do it. You just have to remember it's another piece of fabric, so a little more bulk. You could have another row of fabric, like a binding piece up here, just to form like a stripe. So you could cut this front piece on more of an angle, and if you do that, you just have to remember that the front of your waistband has to come down so it would actually form the triangle down into your pants. But a nice simple waistband that's flattering and comfortable.